Hi, this is Kat Davis again of Painted Paper Crafting, and this is part 3, shading the Santa Treat Pocket that we're painting today. This, of course, is the finished Santa Pocket. We have done the initial sewing and the base coating in the previous two videos, and now we're going to go on to the shading. And the first thing we have to do before we can shade is sew the pocket to the backing. And so for that you're going to need your paper clips. You'll be able to see very easily where your pocket matches up. I usually just do it by eye, although it's pretty clearly marked on the pattern. Hold the pocket in the correct spot using a couple of paper clips, and then we're just going to quickly sew the pocket onto the base. Move your paper clips whenever they get in the way. Sew right on the edge of where you've painted. If you go a little bit inside or a little bit beyond, it's not going to matter because you'll cover that in the shading portion. Okay, we're going to cut the threads very closely, both the front and the back. And then we're ready to shade. I just set the sewing machine aside. And we're just going to use 3 shading colors and 1 highlighting color. And during the break I got clean water because when you are shading you really need clean water for your brushes, because in the shading process you're going to leave a little bit of water in there so that the paint can blend and flow. And the colors are Deco Art Americana colors, and I just dipped my finger into one of them, which is one of the disasters that can happen when you're painting. And you're going to need some paper towels, and I use Honey Brown, Deco Art Americana Honey Brown, Asphaltum Black Plum, and I'm going to use Titanium White for the highlighting. Now, for the first area that we're going to highlight is the beard. And for that you're going to want to use a fairly wide shade. So I use the large 3/4 inch brush. Now, I've seen decorative painters prepare their brushes for shading a couple different ways. I typically just pinch to get most of the moisture out, but when I was taught, my teacher told me to put the brush on the paper towel and count to 3 and then lift up, and that would leave just enough liquid in the brush. So now we're going to spread the paint and blend it in, and I like to do a fairly wide shade and kind of just blend it in. And reload your brush when the paint runs out. Lay it on the paper towel, count to 3. And we're shading the underneath the beard area first, because if you'll remember, I told you in part 2 that because it's difficult to lay the pattern back on the paper because we've used the hot glue for the beard, I like to make sure that I have my shading lines very well defined for the mustache and the beard. So I will be base coating the beard area in just a moment. And you're just going to continue to go all around the beard, a wide shade, blending back and forth as you go. And make sure that you blend it in to where you started your initial shading so that the lines are kind of indistinguishable. And then because I want this one to have a little bit of a rustic look, when I've finished shading an area like this that's done with the warm white, I will usually go back and forth with the brush with what little paint is on there, and it gives it a more rustic look. We also want to shade across the pocket top. So we're just going to do a wide shade across the pocket this way and across the inside area of the pocket. And I just kind of go back and forth here because of the hot glue. It kind of makes it difficult to shade correctly. And then we're going to shade the face. But first, I forgot, we want to do some cheeks. So we'll want to put the corner of the 1/4 inch brush in the Rookwood Red, kind of blend it a little bit on your palette or wax paper. And we're going to kind of run a shade of Rookwood Red in the nose and cheek area. And this kind of needs to be a thin shade in the nose and inner cheeks, but we'll kind of walk out the paint a little bit. That's the term. We kind of walk out the paint for cheeks just a little bit on the side there. Not a whole lot, just a little bit to give the illusion of some cheeks. I didn't get quite enough paint on that cheek area there, so I'm going back in and laying down some more paint. Now while that's drying, we won't shade the rest of the face yet. We want that cheek area to kind of dry. We'll take the asphaltum and some black plum, and we're going to use asphaltum to shade the hat brim and black plum to shade the top of the hat. We also at this time should probably paint in the mustache area so that that has time to dry. So I'm going to do that real quick. And again, you kind of have to force the paint around the hot glue. So that it gets in all the nooks and crannies. So you're going to use a slightly heavier coat than you would normally. Normally when you're base coating, it's better to do 2 thin coats than 1 thick coat. However, in this case, it's kind of unavoidable because of the texture of the glue. So I've based that in, and hopefully that will be dry quickly enough. And we're going to go back to the 1/4 inch brush, and we're going to shade the hat brim with asphaltum. In shading, typically you go around the left side of each project, and highlighting you kind of go towards the light, which is typically the right side. However, I like to go all around all of my features on the shading. Deco art has a really, if you're not sure which colors to use when you're painting a project for shading, Deco Art's got a chart on their website that you can download, and it will tell you the colors that should be used. I follow that chart when I'm doing my more intricate painting. For things like this, I typically go maybe 3 or 4 shades darker because it gives a richer look to the paper. And now we're going to go in and we're just shading all the way around Santa's hat. And then, while that mustache is still drying, I think the face is dry enough now in the cheek area. We're going to go in and shade the rest of the face with honey brown. And I start right about where the cheek area left off, and just go all the way around to the other cheek area. And sometimes that'll overlap on the eyebrows, so I will just kind of take the brush and, while the paint is still wet, kind of manipulate that so that that takes that off. And then one of the last steps that we have to do is we have to shade or paint all the way around the project from the seam line to about 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch beyond. And that's because your edges are going to show because they've been sewn. So I just take the number 4 chisel blender and go all the way around, painting a line on the asphaltum. That's the only color I use whenever I paint on paper for my edges. It gives it a really rich look when it's finished. Now, because I'm going to be trimming this edge as soon as this is dry, I'm not too particular about how wide out I'm going. As long as it's at least 1/8 inch, I know I'm going to be okay. I'm going to go right up to the seam line. One of the other things I like to do when I'm shading is I like to deepen the warm white areas with a thin line of asphaltum on the right side of the project, just a thin line, not as wide as your beginning shade. So it's barely noticeable, but it is just a little bit of a touch that can make a big difference to your project. And like I said, I just do it on the left side of the project. And I do it underneath the mustache. on the left side. And I'm hoping that this beard is dry enough right now that we can go ahead and shade him or it. And we're just going to go all the way around the mustache with honey brown. And we're almost done with that. And then the last thing we're going to do before setting him aside to dry is we're going to highlight. Now on this particular project, and all my Christmas ones as a matter of fact, I will highlight with just one color, titanium white. It gives the illusion of snow. And I'm just going to do that on the right side of all the features. And the first one that I start with is I take just a little tiny bit and I'm going to do kind of like a half circle on the nose area. Or around the nose like that. Then I'm going to use the 3/4 inch brush and I'm going to lay down a real choppy white shade, real choppy so that it gives the illusion of snow all the way around the beard area, the mustache area to the middle of that mustache, and then I'll usually go also down to the first couple curves on the mustache. Then I will do the same for the hat brim, and it's like I said, it's real choppy and real thick. I'm not even really trying to blend here because like I said, I want it to give the illusion of snow. Sometimes I like to use Deco Art Americana's Snow Tex to lay snow down on the project. I'm not going to do that on these particular pockets. Okay, that's what he looks like when he's fully shaded and highlighted. And I'm going to set him aside to dry, and then we will come back for part 4, which will be finishing him and putting him together.